So welcome to the Arts Champions Summit. That's plural champions, of course, because we expect that all of you will be champions for the arts in the region. Today I'm going to give you just a bit of a background on where we've been with our last summit, how we got to where we are, and then just a little bit about where we hope to go in the next year or so. Way back in February 2016, our arts strategy was adopted by the Arts Commission and the CRD Board of Directors. That plan contained 7 specific goals, and that year we undertook the 6-month process building our arts futures together in order to figure out how to fulfill those goals. Inga was there to help us. Many of you were there to help us. Thank you very much. We held 4 pre-consultations, 10 workshops in the region, 34 interviews, lots of other stuff. We published reports at every phase of that process, and you reviewed it at our Arts Champions Summit in November 16. The plan reminded us of our threefold mission: to support, promote, and celebrate the arts. You told us we'd been doing a pretty good job with the funding through supporting, but we hadn't been doing such a great job in the promotion and celebration side. That was a bit of an issue. So what we did was when you told us that our priorities should be to increase access to programs, reduce barriers for equity groups, indigenous arts, emerging organizations, and we needed to enhance the ability of organizations to plan in a sustainable way. One thing you told us was that for many of you, the CRD was a bit of a mystery, right? You didn't understand how the Arts Service worked, what we did, and you told us to provide better information on the Arts Service, to explain how things worked, and to report, more importantly, on the outcomes, right, and the impacts of the arts. This is from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, by the way. The first summit was on October 16. We got the draft plan in December 16. We reviewed and adopted the plan in March 2017, very fast for government, and it proposed 10 actions, 4 related to support and 6 related to promotion and celebration. And the plan proposed adopting a strategic lens, right? We needed to grow and develop organizations by focusing on our mission: to support as a funder, to champion through promotion, and to celebrate the arts as a convener, right? So fund, champion, and convene. Those are our 3 things. The key to the plan was the recommendation to properly resource the work of promotion and celebration by hiring a community outreach coordinator. Jen Nichols there. Please introduce yourself to her sometime this afternoon. She loves to talk. We're also promoting in new ways to reach more people. We've enhanced our website with videos for the hearing impaired, audio recordings for people with low vision, whiteboard videos with simplified language, and we're also holding formal information sessions as well as casual office hours in Centennial Square, for example. We introduced 2 new funding programs. We launched the equity grants to support groups at risk of exclusion due to systemic barriers. We launched incubator grants to support capacity building initiatives, especially for new and emerging organizations. The response to equity grants was fantastic. Less so for incubator grants, I'm sorry to say. We won't have the results until the end of June, but we know that for groups that we haven't traditionally supported, we have opened up the funding, and we hope to do more of that in the future if the response continues. We're going to work on increasing the response to grant deadlines in the future. We've started proactively reporting data and stories, so please subscribe to our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram accounts. We have an e-newsletter, and this year we're going to produce an annual State of the Arts report. We're going to ask you to help us by sharing your stories with us later. The annual report's going to expand on the information that we provide in the Victoria Vital Signs report. It's going to be stories, facts, figures. It's all going to be based on our organizations for the region, right? We're going to show the impact of the arts, and that information is in turn going to help our policymakers decide on how best to support the sector. And convening, you told us that convening was really important. Get people together regularly to encourage conversations, facilitate partnerships, collaborations. One of the things we're doing is we've brought together regular meetings of the cultural planners from across the region. Many of them are here in this room today. They're going to help us later. And today's event has brought us together for exactly this purpose, right? To stimulate conversations, provide opportunities for you to speak to your colleagues, speak to our presenters, and to remind me that after 30 years in the arts, I'm still bussing tables, like all of you. The other member of our team is Heather Haywood. I think she's over there. She's been working with us on the grant programs for 13 years. That makes our full complement of staff 2.8 full-time equivalents. The elected officials, the Arts Commission, and our citizens group, the Arts Advisory Council, make up the rest of the infrastructure of the Arts Service. In 2017, the CRD invested $2.3 million in organizations, and in turn, those organizations generated an additional $10.60 for every dollar invested. So over $24 million in directly generated revenues doesn't capture induced spending or any of the social benefits as a result of the activities. Going forward, we have one more year in the current program. We're going to gauge, monitor the activities. One action not fully adopted was to increase funding by $1 million over 5 years. Unfortunately, Sydney is going to withdraw in 2019, but the great news, as mentioned before, is that Southern Gulf Islands has joined us this year, and we're expecting Souk to join as well. Thanks for listening. Especially for your input in getting us to this point. Inga's going to take over in a second. She's going to facilitate a Q&A, put us on the hot seat, and then she's going to introduce the roundtables and the rest of the afternoon. Thanks so much for coming.
So don't go too far, James. We have a few minutes in the agenda for you to ask further questions and anything related to the CRD Arts Development Service, how they work, what they do, or also to make comments and observations about sort of the update you've just heard. Do we got? No, that's okay. I'm going to give you the mic for a moment.
The question I have for the CRD is it a problem with Sydney around the Mary Winspear Center that they're not getting funding from the CRD to help do that, and that's why Sydney is pulling out? And why can't the CRD and people organize to actually figure out how to deal with this? It feels like the Mary Winspear is a center that's not being given enough money, whereas the Royal and the whatever are getting money. So I'd like to know what the conflict is here.
I'm always very protective as a politician of staff being put in an awkward position of having to speak for another politician. So James, please fill in if anything I say is inaccurate in your mind or incomplete. Councillor Bremner Mitchell is the representative, but the council did vote 5-2 to withdraw without consulting with their municipal population first. I would suggest that the reason they are withdrawing, and this is as it's been communicated to us, is there was not an exit clause for them to leave the service in the new CRD arts bylaw. And so we established the new bylaw that would see 2 levels of participation. Level 2 is about 30% of the requisition. Level 1 is the 100%. And when Sydney was asked to join as a level 2, they said they wanted a provision to opt out. We provided a 2-year where you essentially can opt out without having any questions asked, so to speak, and they were not satisfied that that was enough. The answer of whether or not it's the Winspear, you'd have to ask the councillors. I don't recall them saying that's the reason they wanted to withdraw. I heard it was they preferred to fund the arts in their communities more than they did justify spending arts regionally. And again, Sydney residents, Sydney Council isn't here. We certainly would hope that perhaps with the election there will be a change of mind and they will continue to join, but at this point they've served notice and that is the process that they will be withdrawn from 2019. The CRD Arts Commission has nothing to do with facilities. And that's an important distinction. We fund the organizations, yours, that make art. We have identified that perhaps a facilities discussion could be facilitated by the CRD Arts Commission. That was part of our Building Our Arts Future outcomes, but it is not a venue where we discuss the Royal, the Mac, the Winspear, the Isabel Reader, the Oak Bay Theatre, any of those facilities at this juncture. So please, James, fill in. Thank you for the question. I'm sorry for being long-winded, but it is disappointing, but that hopefully will change.
He captured it quite well.
It's actually a really complicated topic. That harmless sounding question is really complicated, right? And I think one of the things we actually found when we worked through the public consultations process in 2016 is that people had a lot of misconceptions about who funds what in the region. And the facility side is really quite apart from that in terms of the physical infrastructure being owned or funded not by the CRD itself. So that continues to be an interesting conversation, I guess. Other observations, questions? Bert, I'm coming.
James, I've got two questions. As I was taking my notes, I probably heard you incorrectly, but you were saying that there's a possibility of in 2020 or after next year, some of the funding being removed. Is that correct, or what did you say on that end?
I don't think I projected anything in 2020.
No, you just said after next year. Possibility of some funding disappearing.
Sydney is withdrawing,
Yes.
and so that portion of what they contributed will no longer be part of our core budget. They contributed $15,000 a year.
Yes.
So
The only thing different then would be the amount of funding because of their withdrawal. Your total pot of funding.
were you talking about incubator funding?
Yes.
Those two programs, Incubator and Equity, are currently in 2-year pilots. The implementation plan said run them for 2-year pilots, look for the demand in the community. If there's demand, increase the funding accordingly. So that is the recommendation of the current plan. We've established the programs. We're going to run them for 2 years. The Arts Commission is going to look at the level of uptake for those programs. As I say, Equity was like fantastic in terms of the interest. We're going to look at Incubator and sort of see if we're not doing something right in terms of reaching organizations, or maybe there just aren't. Maybe we can only expect like maybe half a dozen organizations a year in Incubator. It's a very specific type of program for emerging organizations that need help with their organizational capacity. It's not for creating projects. We have project grants for that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that answers my question. The second one was, the gentleman in the audience mentioned that if our facilities are on First Nations land or First Nations on First Nations land, we cannot apply to the CRD. Is that incorrect or correct?
It's a little bit not quite right. The basic principle of a CRD service is that municipalities who contribute benefit. The difficulty for us is that because First Nations land is not a CRD municipality, they don't contribute, we haven't figured out a way around that in terms of the way the tax dollars are supposed to flow back to the community that contributes. I'm not sure how to do that. I'm not sure whether I need to go and somehow change the Local Government Act or the Community Charter. I probably don't have enough years left in my working life to get to that point, but we totally acknowledge the issue. And it is an issue. It's a big issue. We're trying to deal with that a little bit in the equity program by allowing any, for example, First Nations group who isn't a society to find any society that will act as their sponsor organization. That's our way around that for the time being.
And of course, there's many different Indigenous peoples do live within the CRD municipalities proper, right? So it's a sort of a twofold piece. Other questions, comments?
Can you just elaborate a little bit on that? In that, I think I asked you that question during an info session, and is that for both equity and incubator funding, or just one?
I'm sorry, is what for?
The having to have the First Nations groups collaborate with a nonprofit organization to be eligible.
Incubator grants require an organization to be an arts mandated, not-for-profit society. Equity grants allow any group that falls under the eligibility of the program to apply, whether they may be a society themselves, or if they're not, they can find a society. They don't need to be themselves an arts mandated group because of the nature of the way we're trying to allow as many applications as possible.
Who else? The next thing that happens after this is a break for refreshments and such things. If there aren't any other questions or observations, we're going to move on to that. Oh, I see a hand back in the back corner, just as I'm wandering to the opposite side of the room. This is invariably how it works. All right, we'll be right there in a second. It's good exercise.
Hello, I'm one of the founders of the Pandora Arts Collective Society in Fernwood, and we're in our 12th year. I'm here to, I guess, perhaps naively, but specifically, to see if there is any plan or possibility of a shared art space that we could move into. And we've been using the Little Fernwood Hall for free, which is amazing, but it's not an art studio, and we're ruining their space and clogging up the sink, and there isn't very good lighting. It's cold in the winter and so on. We have a street-level gallery with the Little Fernwood Gallery, so we're really appreciative of that facility. Is there some way to access through the CRD either however many thousands of dollars a month it would be to rent a space, or is there a possibility of a Blue Bridge type of 20-year focus on building an art space that we could all perhaps collaboratively use in a combined way?
I'll start by saying that, reiterating something that I think Colin mentioned earlier, that we actually don't have a particular mandate, nor do we have a capital fund for building. CRD doesn't really have those kinds of building resources available. If you're interested in the Blue Bridge model, Brian Richmonds and Rebecca are right over there. I think they can tell you about how they did it. They've done kind of a remarkable job in terms of maintaining their space. The other thing I would say for this room, I mean, there are many people in this room who may be facing the same issues. I think this is one of the reasons we were told to get people together so that you can try and meet other people who have the same issue with you. One thing that you may not be aware of, I don't know whether you are or not, is that there is an initiative within the city of Victoria to renovate the old Maritime Museum into a shared use space by a number of arts organizations. That's a possibility. You might want to contact a gentleman named Ian Piers at the Downtown Victoria Business Association. He's kind of leading that initiative. That might be a possibility for you. And I would, I'm sorry, what's your name again? Jean Oliver is over there. If anyone has any collaborative possibilities for her, I invite you to speak to her. I'm sorry I don't have anything concrete for you, but I would hope that within this group, maybe there's some possibilities for bringing something together.
All right. Any other last observations or questions? This is your moment. There we go.
Just curious on the status or progress or thoughts on multi-year funding cycles.
We are introducing multi-year funding cycles, or at least the idea of it. We've done some research on it. There's a draft program in front of the Arts Commission right now. We're doing some additional surveying of the need for the program. And if it gets approved, we're hoping to be able to implement it this fall for eligible organizations.
And that'll cover core funding, right? Those core funding?
Operating funding.
Operating funding, thank you.
I'm curious about the the type of financials required, whether those are still going to reflect the revenues of the organization or whether they're going to reflect the amount of the grant requested. I know that at the moment, I believe it's a notice to reader that's requested if there's above a certain amount of organizational revenue. Is that correct?
That's correct. The question is about financial statements. I'll say that for every grant program, we require an organization to provide year-end financial statements or interim statements if they're longer than 6 months old. We also require a project budget or an operating budget, depending on the program. I think the specific question is the requirement on the minimum budget size for notice to reader. Is that? Review engagement statements are required by organizations with budgets between $300,000 and $750,000. Notice to read is required for organizations with budgets lower than $300,000. Those are the standard requirements.
Is there an appetite to change that within the community?
What would you change it to?
Change it to reflect the request rather than the organizational revenue.
Well, one of the things that we do with any assessment of any application, whatever program it is we're trying to get some sense of the organization's stability, financial stability. And one of the ways we can do that is by getting financial statements. For smaller budget organizations, we require the lowest level of financial statements, which is notice to reader, which actually don't even need to be done by an accountant. They can be done by a qualified person who understands how the format should work. They don't provide any assurance in terms of the financial side, but notice to reader is pretty minimal requirement, and it does indicate to us at least a minimum ability of the organization to provide us organized information about what their financial situation is. So I don't think that's going to change. Sure, of course.
So I'm wondering about the review engagement. For example, if there's a request for $8,000, say, and you guys require a review engagement which costs $7,000, then it's not worth that organization's time to go and make the request because getting a review engagement eats into that money too much. So I'm wondering if the level of the request, if there could be an appetite to change that. I know I have an appetite to change it.
Currently, the decision, the policy around requirement of financial statements is not going to change. It's going to be based on budget size.
Anybody else? All right. We're going to have a few minutes break. I think it's about until 3:30. Which will be about 20 or so minutes from now. There's a few refreshments that have appeared. Some of you might still have to go and get your parking meters fed and whatnot. And we'll be back here at 3:30. Thank you.